From athletic stuff like a full court pickup game, swish, to athlete-ish stuff like a half-mile stroll. Get those steps in. Head to Sierra or Sierra.com for the brands you want at the prices that let you do it all. From athletic to athlete-ish, Sierra's got it.
We're here because your heightened awareness deserves heightened entertainment. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Believe it or not, many men are moisturizing, they're toning, they're bulking, they're injecting, all the while insisting it's not working on their beauty. So let's talk about how guys can be deep in beauty appearance culture, but somehow allergic to that word. Beauty. They'll call it anything but that. I am joined by Dr. Jordan Foster, a sociology professor at MacEwan University in Edmonton, to discuss this. He's done research on this. Jordan, what a pleasure it is having you on the show.
Thank you for having me, David. It's great to be here.
So when we say men are embracing beauty culture but refusing to call it that, what are they calling it instead? And why does that matter?
Yeah. Well, so two things to take into consideration. One is that across data points, we know men are embracing beauty culture. So if it's, as you said, turning to injections or cosmetic surgery, we know this is on the uptick. More sort of everyday or mundane practices like investing in a skincare routine, moisturizers, those are also sort of on the uptick. So men are certainly engaging. But as you've noted, they're really avoiding that language of beauty and beautification. So they've called it, honestly, everything and anything but beauty. So we've seen, for example, the term looks maxing really trending among men. This is a
So
way
silly.
but it's a sort of more masculine way of referring to like practices of beautification. We've seen men, talking about self-optimization, taking a sort of entrepreneurial spin toward their beauty practices and investments in appearance and attractiveness. Sometimes we might just be calling this bulking up, right? Or becoming more attractive or available. You'll sometimes see a sort of sexualized bent on this too. So we might see men, for example, describing this in terms of optimizing appearance for women, for their dates, for making sure that they show up as their best self.
So for the straight men out there, I'm going to disclose something to make it, normalized. I keep a little stick of concealer in my pocket, to cover zits and stuff. And I don't care. But I feel like when I'm at the airport and I toss it in the bin and then people look at me like, why does this guy have a makeup stick? I still feel like it's weird. Somehow, I don't want to be associated with like feminine beauty culture. I mean, I don't care on its surface, but I still feel that like judgment. Is that why this distinction matters? Like men are somehow being judged as being feminine, and that's somehow a bad thing? It shouldn't be.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it, right? Is that beauty is this deeply feminized subject matter or domain, right, of practice. So we often associate practices related to beauty as being frivolous, as being superficial. And that sort of is consistent with how we've often treated feminine subjects and femininity more broadly. So it's not surprising in light of that men are sort of, as you said, allergic to the term beauty, that they might be critiqued as superficial or vain for having, like you said, a stick of concealer or even using lip chap. Now, on the other hand, there is some, I would describe maybe more progressive conversations around beauty online. So there are more men talking about, I do have that stick of concealer, or I am using like a CC cream to color correct my face to sort of look a little bit better. Not often in that language of beauty. It's couched in other spaces and other kinds of vocabularies. But it is, I think, a positive to see more men at least openly beginning to have this dialogue and this conversation around the work that they're doing on their bodies.
And it's so mixed up because there are domains where men are, quote unquote, allowed to care about their look. For example, no one would judge a man for buying like a perfectly tailored suit. But that's aesthetics, that's beauty, that's your looks. Why makeup? Why skincare? Why certain things opposed to others?
Yeah. Well, I would say that this has that sort of historical bent to it, right? Which is that we have seen certain norms relax in some spaces. So like clothing, also a space historically dominated by women. It's a space we've seen more investment in over the years. And so over the years, our concerns around investing in things like clothing, they've begun to dissipate, right? Or to lessen. I think that the same will be true ultimately of things like makeup and skincare, but we're simply not there yet. Even something like, physical fitness, that's something most men can get on board with. They're super into the gym. They want to bulk up or maybe slim down. They don't often describe that as a kind of beauty work. And in my own research with students, particularly young men, that's something that we try and sort of dialogue around, is that you are working on the body. And if it was a woman working on her body to improve her appearance, we would typically describe this as a kind of beautification. So can we have that sort of switch, right? To think about muscularity even as an investment in appearance and in beauty.
Does dysmorphia pop up there? The feeling like your body's not good enough? I feel like that's a conversation we had about women's bodies maybe 20, 30 years ago, about weight. Is the same true about maybe like muscles for men? Are there body image issues that crop up in men that aren't talked about enough?
Yes, 100%. And this is something that we're seeing sort of slowly rising among men. And again, not surprising. So, as the weight of beauty shifts more onto men, as it has long been borne by women, we're seeing that corresponding rise in body related issues. So, an uptick in reporting on things like body dysmorphia, muscle dysmorphia among men. So, this preoccupation with the size of one's bodies and sort of persistent unhappiness with the sort of size of their muscles, right? Or the shape and tone of their body overall. We're also seeing in general more sort of appearance anxieties and insecurities being reported by men and young men especially. And I think that's due not only to this investment in beauty and the body, but also to the rise of sort of men's bodies on platforms that young people especially are deeply invested in. So we know on social media, if you open your Instagram or TikTok, you're going to see some topless men. You're going to see men who are sort of centering your eye on their appearance. Typically, these are very muscular men. They tend to be quite conventionally attractive. That's having a kind of effect, right, on young men and other men who are seeing all of this and are now really inundated in ways that women long have been inundated by these beauty and body messages. And so it is taking a toll across, like I said, those insecurities that rise in anxieties, and in more extreme cases, in instances of body dysmorphia and muscle dysmorphia specifically.
Is it a good thing that men are being welcomed into this club of not feeling great about your body? Shouldn't we just abolished the club? So there's this thread of sort of like equality. It's now happening to men and women the same, but it's also like, oh, we all shouldn't feel bad about our bodies.
Yes. It's okay. I love this point. It's a point of discussion among scholars and these sort of professionally intelligent people who have been debating, does this mean that men and women are now equal? If these beauty pressures that women have long faced applied to men, does that mean the sexes are somehow equal? That's not necessarily the case.
Sure.
Because while these pressures and their consequences are rising, they do actually look different in their scope and scale. And
Yes.
men can still get away with a lot more than what women can get away with. So men, for example, can avoid doing work on their appearance. They can show up as a little bit frumpy. We have the popularization of the dad bod. So there's still a space for men to actually neglect appearance, to neglect the body, to neglect their investment, so to speak. And that's not considered a bad thing in the same way that women neglecting their appearance is often criticized and very vocally, right? So women still tend to be understood more narrowly in terms of their appearance, whereas this is now just a part of our consideration of men and masculinity. So I would say this probably doesn't signal a shift in greater equality, not in whole, maybe in part. Another thing that I think is worth considering is whether or not, and you sort of touched on this, David, it's even a good thing that beauty's force expand in general, right? Because I would argue that its expansion into the lives of men actually is a signal of the fact that beauty's pressures are expanding across the board, right? That women face more intensive pressures just as men are beginning to face some of these appearance-focused pressures. So you can think of investments in plastic surgery, in cosmetics, in injections, which we know are all on the rise, right? That would be a signal that actually beauty's pressures are weighing more on everybody.
Bottom line, would you like to see the word beauty enter this looks maxing men only space? I certainly would. This shouldn't be so stigmatized.
Oh, yes. And I think that's important for a couple of reasons. But the one that I'd really like people to think about is that when you fail to name it beauty, you're actually obscuring a lot of the weightiness of that subject matter. You're kind of trivializing your engagement with what's become this really highly demanding subject matter. And it masks all kinds of consequences, especially those sort of appearance pressures, the insecurities that men are facing, the rise in those body-related disorders. Like, that's important to really consider and grapple with. And I think that that's going to come as we start to approach this through the lens of beauty, as we're more careful about the language that we're using.
Jordan, I've enjoyed this chat. Thank you for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you, David.
The world is changing. From the misuse of AI and the rise of deepfakes to the dangerous spread of misinformation, it's getting harder for Canadians to separate fact from fiction. That's why having a trustworthy news source is vital. At Global News, we're committed to objective journalism that cuts through the noise. Stick to the facts. Global News, Canada's trusted news.